Today's subject is positive psychology, which is a rather upbeat topic compared to pretty much all others by definition. Uh, so let's get started. Oh, first, are there any comments or things you want to say first before we begin class? All right, I'll share a screen here. All right, there's our front slide. Positive psychology started, well, I was thinking about when can you say that positive psychology started? You could see hints of positive psychology in the optimistic perspectives uh, toward humanity and human capability and faith in humanity, uh, as evidenced in various psychologists, including William James and Carl Jung, Abraham Maslow, uh, Adler, uh, and others. But it didn't really become a field that was known by name until Seligman in 1998. He is one of the four foremost researchers in positive psychology. So in 1998, as president of the APA, Seligman urged us to focus more on building human strength and psychological well-being to create a new direction and orientation and field of research and movement called positive psychology. This is the science of happiness. It seeks to identify and promote qualities that lead to greater fulfillment, looks at people's strengths and what helps them lead contented lives, and moves away from focusing on pathology, faults, and problems. And it's about valuing subjective experiences, and well-being, contentment, satisfaction in the past, hope and optimism for the future, happiness in the present. It's all about positive personality traits and the capacity to work, love, uh, have courage, interpersonal skill, aesthetic sensibility, perseverance, forgiveness, originality, future mindedness, spirituality, talent, and wisdom. Basically, it's a celebration of all of human strengths and encouraging us to look at those, to not ignore them, but to emphasize them, remember them, uh, and to make the most of our lives in light of them, in light of our strengths. Any comments? Positive psychology on the other side of the field, or the other side, kind of like the other side of the coin, whereas most of psychology tends to look at what can go wrong with humans and why, but the positive psychology focuses on what can go right and why or how. There are positive and encouraging aspects of humans, such as their quest for greater happiness, self-improvement, performance, effectiveness, efficiency, behavior, ethics, and being considerate, etc. Happy people are healthier, more successful, and more socially engaged, and the causal direction runs in both directions. So, uh, people that can become more engaged, however they can figure out how to do so, find happiness. So the causal direction is not just one way, it's two ways. That is often the case with many things in psychology. When we first think that we can discover the causality, we later on find that causality is multi-directional, and that just like sad thoughts can spiral into sad feelings, which feed sad thoughts, etc. The causality direction is often ambiguous or multi-directional. And so it is with happy thoughts and happy moods as well. Any comments, questions?
So does like positive psychology ignore any negative aspects of psychology?
Any, did you say meditative?
Like negative.
Negative. Are you asking if there's negative aspects of positive psychology?
Yeah.
Or psychology in general?
And positive psychology.
Good question. Mm. Yeah, I suppose so, because positive has no meaning without negative. So positive psychology admits to and acknowledges the negative aspect of ourselves and tendencies and leanings and our nature, our negative natures, encouraging us to lean more into the positive.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Anything else? Identifying happiness. An enduring sense of my state of mind consisting of joy, contentment, and other positive emotions, well-being in general. That is what happiness is. So we can define happiness as joy, contentment, other positive emotions. And well-being is another word for happiness. So sometimes you'll see the word measuring well-being or establishing greater well-being, etc. Is that the same as happiness? Well, kind of. It's all in the same neighborhood. Sometimes these terms like joy and happiness and contentment take on little subtle distinguishing features, but often they are used as synonyms for one another. They're all basically in the same neighborhood. A number of perspectives, such as spiritual, religious, and others, emphasize virtue, reverence, enlightenment, inner peace, joy, greater joy from greater satisfaction, and that can come from engagement, meaning, reward, excitement with one's surroundings, greater satisfaction with surroundings, such as satisfaction with one's career, hobbies, and relationships with others and with yourself. So all of these attributes and aspects of happiness and well-being and joy and contentment can come through the lens of religious, spiritual, or other perspectives. Positive psychology is generally separate from religious and spiritual perspectives per se, but not always. Sometimes positive psychology and spiritual psychology or spirituality or religiosity or religiousness are going hand in hand, and sometimes they're treated differently. or as siblings or neighbors, or just different perspectives on happiness in general. So positive psychology is more directed at happiness in general, not at spirituality. Whereas spirituality and other disciplines also aim to address things like happiness. So they are joint students of happiness, joint subjects. All right, how happy are people? And I allow me to clarify that you don't need religiosity or spirituality to find happiness or be happy. Atheists and agnostics certainly are interested in happiness and find happiness on their own, absent of religion and spiritual pursuits or discussion. Okay, so how happy are people? This is an interesting and important question. I'm glad that the world is asking this question, because if the world is ignoring happiness, that doesn't bode well for our own positive positive future. So we do want to care about and consider and try to maximize happiness in order to enjoy this thing we call life. So the World Happiness Report surveyed people in 156 countries. And I looked up how many countries are in the world and found that there are 195, between 193 and 195, depending on your definition of a country. But so most countries evaluated their current lives on a scale ranging from 0 to 10, with 0 representing the worst possible life, 10 representing the best possible life. The average was right around in the middle, or maybe a little less than, a little above the middle, because the halfway between 0 and 10 is 5. Yeah. I'm seeing the chat box. I wonder what Thailand's average was. Thanks, Dane. I don't know. It's a good question. I could have looked that up. I think that would be on Wikipedia. It's a good question. If someone finds that, please type it into the chat box. The 5 happiest countries were Denmark, Norway, Switzerland, the Netherlands, and Sweden. Interesting how they're all very kind of in the same area. They probably have a common cause. I don't know what that is. It might be their government style or their culture. I don't really know. Or their wealth. Probably it has to do with wealth, as we're going to explore in this very next bullet or paragraph. All top countries have high values for 6 key variables: income, healthy lifestyle, life expectancy, social support, freedom, trust, and generosity. So looking at these top happy countries, we can see that they tend to be wealthy, very wealthy, and have social support. They're kind of socialist, some of them at least. There's a lot of freedom. And because of their social support and income and healthy lifestyle, they tend to trust and be generous, I suppose. So maybe some of these key variables interact or produce one another or fuel, contribute to one another. So they're not necessarily all completely independent of one another from the looks of it. But anyway, there's these 6 key variables that seem to predict or account for happiness by country. Now, if you look at happiness of the citizens and you look at their immigrant population, I just learned about this yesterday. I read this on Wikipedia. Immigrants' happiness mirrors the national happiness of the citizens, but with a 10 to 25% lag from their previous country. So if you move from a happier country to a less happy country, you're going to lag behind the national average, which means you're going to be a little bit happier than the national average because you're still carrying some of the previous country's outlook in yourself. But if you move from a sadder, more destitute country to a more well-off and prosperous and happier country, then you're bound to increase your happiness, but still stay below the new national average by some 10 to 25%. And this is typical, not 100% guaranteed per individual. It's just a typical average for citizens and their immigrant populations. All right, looking at the chat box here. Wow, 6. Thailand ranks 6. That's sorry. That's not a ranking. That's a number on the scale of 0 to 10. Okay, so that's better than average. Great.
Just like
4.7 in 2016. Any thoughts or comments? I wouldn't say it's surprisingly low. I mean, it's above average. It's almost, I don't know, maybe like a full standard deviation or maybe more than that. Above average. That's pretty good. Oh, okay. 52. Number 52 in the world of countries. So 52 out of 156. That's in the top third. It's about 1/3 from the top. And Japan was at 58, South Korea at 54. Very interesting. So it sounds pretty good. Impressive. Thank you for looking that up. Yeah, that's great. All right. Seligman, the most prominent, the longest, I would say the most experienced researcher in positive psychology, one of the founders of the field, summarized the happy life or achieving happiness in general as a composite of 3 kinds of life or 3 levels of description of life. That life is pleasant, that you are engaged in life, and that life is meaningful. So a pleasant life is one that's realized through the attainment of day-to-day pleasures, things that add fun, joy, and excitement to our lives. An example would be evening walks around the beach, having sex, not just any sex, but a fulfilling sex life. So that means achieving what you have in mind as your goal or goals for sex. These enhance daily pleasures. So your everyday happiness, like if at the end of a day you rank your happiness or you rate your happiness on a 1 to 10 scale or 0 to 10 scale, some of these activities these pleasant everyday activities would affect your rating in a positive direction. So if you went to the beach that day, that would probably increase your happiness for that day. Or if you had a get together with your friends, that would probably increase your happiness that day. So these things are pleasant life. The engaged life is achieved through identifying our unique skills and abilities and engaging these talents to enrich our lives. Engagement. Those who achieve this life often find themselves absorbed in their work or their hobbies and their pursuits. So engagement with things that that you enjoy or that have meaning, especially if you're good at them. So if you are engaged in a task that you're really not good at, for example, you are playing a game, but you're really bad at the game, we would not call that engagement so much because it's not your unique skill or ability. However, it can still be engaging if you're even if you're a beginner. So I don't know how that fits in. But a more easy to understand example is poets make poetry. So when you're engaged in your field of expertise, you're good at it. That I think I understand now. The engagement in something that you are skilled at means that you're more engaged in that activity, because to the extent that you have skill and expertise and knowledge and know-how, that allows you to engage more deeply and more thoroughly into that activity. And perhaps it's not the engagement itself, but the engagement plus your ability together create that, what I'm going to talk about later on, the sense of flow, which is a positive, pleasurable, enjoyable experience, and creates happiness. And the last one, the meaningful life. This involves a sense of pleasure and fulfillment from using our talents for greater good, benefiting our lives and the lives of others to make the world a better place. So, for example, artists develop new art forms, and that makes the world more rich for other artists. The poet creates sentiment for people that allows people to dwell upon and capture and understand or identify with a certain kind of sentiment. So that adds meaning from the artist or poet to the greater community. And teachers inspire, for example. These things add meaning to life because they are not only between self and self, they're not limited to the own personal sphere, but that spreads out to others, and sharing meaning and values and benefits with others is inherently meaningful, and that meaning gives us a sense of deep pleasure that we can't get from the previous two kinds of life, the pleasant life and the engaged life. I'm taking a look at the chat box. Art nowadays. Okay, so happiness factors. Happiness scores across countries relate strongly to 6 key variables. I mentioned these earlier, I think. Didn't I? 6 key variables: income, healthy life expectancy, social support, freedom, trust, and generosity. So here they are again, I guess. That's per capita GDP, in other words, the country's economic standard of living, social support, freedom to make important life choices, healthy life expectancy, freedom from perceived corruption in the government and business, and generosity. So this is the same list 2 slides earlier, but just expanded a little more. I didn't realize the redundancy here, but at least this slide expands on that a little. So now that was 6 traits, 6 key variables by country. However, there's also 6 traits at the individual personality level of happiness. This is based on widely distributed surveys and questionnaires and interviews, basically the results of a lot of happiness research across a lot of countries came up with these 6 basic traits or predictors of happiness: wisdom, courage, humanity, justice, temperance, and transcendence. So these are considered cross-culturally relevant, general things that people value and anticipate as not anticipate, associate with happiness, classify, consider, and believe to be associated with happiness, and the opposite of and their opposites correspond to the opposite of happiness. So we want wisdom and we don't want the opposite of wisdom, which is foolishness or folly, silliness or stupidity. We want courage. We don't want what's the opposite? Cowardice.
Cowardice.
Thank you. Cowardice. Yeah. We want humanity. We don't want help me out.
Alienation.
Inhumanity. That's one. Having no ethics and no consideration of other humans. We want justice. We don't want injustice. We want temperance. We don't want going off the deep end, going
You want
extreme.
control and not chaos.
What was that?
You want control and not chaos.
We want control. Yeah, control.
It seems like it can be generalized to all these things. You know,
I'm
justice.
sorry, let me turn up my volume. I can't hear it.
Okay.
Could you say that again?
Control versus chaos. We'd rather have control.
That's
over
true.
Chaos.
That's true. And so where's that one in the list? It's not, is it? But
Yeah,
that's very true.
It feels like it's generalized to all these things because wisdom, courage, humanity, justice, temperance, transcendence, all of this is done through a sense of control. And the opposite of them is the lack of control over these things, you know? Like inhumanity is us, you know, just doing what we want and we can do horrible things, and justice is just no justice, so that's everything. You know?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I like what you said. That's really good. In other words, there's a higher level factor beyond these 6, which we can call control. And that control or lack thereof can explain the development or the lack of development of the rest of these features. Because without control, we can never develop, as you said, wisdom, courage, humanity, justice, temperance, transcendence. And that last one, transcendence, the opposite of that is, I would say, reverse evolution, because transcendence to me is the next step in evolution. Would you like to contrast that or other ideas? Anyone?
Well, rather than control, I thought maybe order might be a better term.
Order.
But then again, there was quite a few incidents where people would rather face chaos rather than have a completely ordered life.
Right.
And as was mentioned previously in the previous slide, there was a element of freedom, adventurism, the human spirit, spirituality. Those things are not quite compatible with control, at least not in my opinion.
Good. I think control and its opposite, chaos, or actually the opposite of control is lack of control. And then Dane, you pointed out order and its opposite, which is chaos, are going hand in hand. So those two qualities, good description and good point. That's a nice higher level or abstraction from these 6 traits to their common feature, their underlying, you could say underlying or umbrella term or feature, trait. All right, thanks. Now going to the more specific, if you take these 6 traits, you can divide them into 24 sub-traits, which I'm going to read to you now. This was based on the same global multi-study research over years and years, decades probably. They've come with, basically researchers have come up with 24 traits that are related to happiness, and here they are. Wisdom, under the wisdom trait, there's creativity, curiosity, open-mindedness, love of learning, and perspective. Under the courage trait, there is authenticity, bravery, persistence, and zest. Under humanity traits, there's kindness, love, social intelligence. Under justice, there is fairness, leadership, and teamwork. Under temperance, there's forgiveness, modesty, prudence, and self-regulation. And under transcendence, there's appreciation of beauty and excellence, gratitude, hope, humor, and religiousness. So all of these fit to their next higher level 6 predictors, these 6 traits. But all of the 24 traits also predict happiness. It's just a finer tuned classification. So when you look at, let's say 200 survey questions, and you look at all of the underlying factors that affect how people answer these questions, we find certain traits or factors that influence how people answer. And I think through that kind of research, looking at the general themes of questions and asking people point blank, open-ended questions, we get these. We come to the research has come to these traits and how they're related to happiness. All right, so these 24 traits or sub-traits Of these, the heart strengths, which were decided to be zest, gratitude, hope, and love, were more strongly associated with life satisfaction compared to there were some more mental traits that were listed under the wisdom and knowledge traits, including curiosity, open mindedness, love of learning, and perspective. Those things were less related to long term happiness, whereas the heart strength traits, gratitude, zest, hope, and love, were more associated with happiness. So happiness seems to come from the heart more than from the mind in in a manner of speaking. Somehow it seems like that's what we might take away from that. Self-regulation predicted happier offspring. That's an interesting finding because self-regulation, which is one of the temperance traits, was not predictive of the individual's happiness. So here we see that there's some correlation studies that were done. So self-regulation was not correlated with happiness, but it did correlate with the children's happiness. Would you like to attempt an explanation of that? Anyone? Why are the children happier if the parents have more self-regulation?
Hmm.
Wasn't there a study about how children have a better growth pattern if there was a order to how their parents, or if there was a consistent in how their parents raised them and how other people behave around them? So that may factor into this, perhaps.
Hmm. I'm sure it does. And what you were saying reminded me of the marshmallow study. I showed you that already?
Yes.
Yeah.
Mhm.
That was all about self-control. And self-control in the young children did predict better success in life, which is, I'm pretty sure, associated with happiness. Um, but it's a indirect linkage. So self-control doesn't produce happiness directly, but only through, or perhaps only through, greater achievement later on in life. However, um, where does that self-control come from? Are these kids genetically determined to have self-control?
I think it's
Maybe.
I think it's a bit of both. I think it's
Yeah,
never, if you're doing like nurture versus nature, it's always both.
it's always both. Thank you. That's very true.
I think when it comes to like self-regulation makes happier offspring, I think it's because it's it gives the children a good way of life. Like they see their parents, they're not too angry, they're always fair, they're always doing as much as they can to be as fair and happy as they can be. The children see that and they realize that's the best way to go. Like authoritative, I think it's authoritative parents who they have rules, but and you can still get punished, but these rules are explained to you. You're not punished because um, you don't know what's happening. Like you just suddenly get punished and you don't know the reason why. You have rules, you have a set way of life to live, and your parents will guide you through that. And since self-regulation means that they won't be too angry all the time, they're at least they try to be as consistent. And I'm pretty sure consistency in a good way is the factor in which you get a child that's well developed, and they kind of
Mm-hmm.
just carry on that torch of self-regulation. And of course it's not going to be like perfect all the way, but your child's not going to focus on the failures of their parents if they know that the parents are trying their best to, control their emotions, teach their child a good way of life. It's just a good example, and they'll understand that example, and it's consistent. It's not like they're gonna grow into teenagers and realize, oh, this sort of lifestyle is not correct, or the way they're thinking is wrong. They can see that it's very healthy, it's very good, and it's just the best way to raise a kid. That's probably why they're so happy in the end.
Very good. Thank you. Good explanation. Yeah. Okay. Yep. Go on to the next slide. Relationships and happiness. So next I'm going to talk about a lot of things that are related to happiness. Relationships are a major factor correlated with happiness. They don't cause happiness necessarily, or they do, but it may be a two-way. It is often a two-way relationship, as I was saying before. People in a good marriage are happier than single, divorced, or widowed people. However, people in a bad marriage are not happier than single, divorced, or widowed people. So it really just depends on the marriage. Does some research suggests that satisfaction with marriage and family life is the strongest predictor of happiness? Yeah, that's just some research. Yeah. Someone asked if I could share the 24 traits that are related to happiness. Yeah, sure. I can append that to the slide, the slide that lists the 6 traits, and then I will re-upload that to Blackboard, and you can download that. So I'll make a note of that. So happy people tend to have more frequent contact with more high quality relationships than less happy people. So high quality relationships then feed back into preserve or persevere that happiness. So happiness perseveres because it it seeks and finds additional sources of pleasure and happiness and fulfillment. Do these make people happy, or does happiness make these things happen? Correlation studies cannot answer this. Often causality is a two-way street. Being happy produces having better relationships, and having better relationships produces being happy, contributes to. Relationships are a major factor correlated with happiness. Oops. Money and happiness. Can money buy happiness? Maybe, with qualifications. National per capita gross domestic product is associated with happiness levels, as I mentioned before, but changes in GDP are not associated with happiness. So we should find that if you affect GDP, happiness should rise or fall in step with GDP if GDP is a real cause of happiness. But if GDP fluctuates from year to year and happiness levels don't fluctuate in step, that suggests that they are not directly related. So just because you see a high correlation between two variables does not mean that one causes the other. Correlation does not imply causation. And when manipulating one does not directly affect the other, then that implies that they are not directly causally related. It's true that money can buy food. Thank you, Prim. But
I think it's about
and-
how you use the money, you know? You can have like a lot of money to like to help your life get better, bigger house. You can give your kids like a better education. If you kind of like, because I remember like what you said with sex, it could be fulfilling, but if it's meaningless, it's not gonna be. So if you have like a ton of money and you waste it without any real meaning, it will result in an unhappy life. You can still be rich, happy, and awesome. And you know, I mean, look at Bill
right,
Gates. Look at Bill
right.
Gates. That guy's like a moral pillar.
Yeah, and he's happy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the work, I want to suggest that I have like the worst case. I mean, like in the history, the Great Depression. I think can be related to like money and happiness. Like in 1929, the Great Depression.
Yeah. So during the Great Depression, was money related to happiness? I'm sure it was. These things are related. So that first bullet or sub bullet, that GDP and happiness are not directly related. Well, GDP is not at the personal level, it's at the country level. Let's go to the next bullet. Residents of wealthy countries tend to be happier than residents of poor countries. Again, that's the GDP thing. It's not saying that the residents themselves are wealthy, they just live in wealthy countries. And then, and it's all about, you know, distribution of wealth. Because if you survey the wealthiest from the wealthiest countries, that's not necessarily representative of the people in that country. Next, third bullet point, within countries, the wealthy are happier than the poor. Okay, now we're getting to money and happiness. The wealthy are happier than the poor. It's weaker correlation than above, but it is a correlation. Okay. And the fourth bullet, increases in purchasing power, so individual wealth, are associated with increases in happiness. However, income within societies appears to correlate with happiness only up to a point. Well-being rises with income only up to a point, around the upper middle class level. Beyond that, when you rise beyond upper middle class, your additional wealth does not correspond to additional happiness. But below that point, additional wealth does correspond to additional happiness. That's the general result of lots and lots of research that has looked at this question. Because as you can guess, this is an interesting question to people. Does money make you happy? After all, we all seek money and we all seek happiness. We think that the two are the same thing or very closely connected. And so what we have here is the answer from tons of research. The answer is yes, up to a point. Any thoughts? Yeah. And this is not to discount what one of you said. One of the students said that it's also how you use your money. You can use it in an empty ways or use it in fulfilling ways. And I'm certain that fulfilling leads to greater happiness. But fulfilling and empty are terms that that are subjective. But I think it relates to like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. When you are adequately fulfilled at a lower level, those things no longer fulfill you, and you have to reach up to a higher level to continue to seek fulfillment. If money can buy that thing, then I can see how money could buy happiness. So money can buy food and housing and clean water, etc., especially where those things are harder to come by. Then if you have money, that should relate to happiness very directly. But then as that becomes more and more the norm, and more people can have that baseline level of security and happiness, then the pursuit of happiness has to reach to the next level, which money may or may not be able to buy. I was going on a tangent there. It's all related to happiness, but it goes beyond the lecture notes, or the slides, I mean. I was thinking about Maslow. In fact, I was thinking Maslow is one of the founders of positive psychology, even though the field of positive psychology didn't yet exist. Maslow is considered a humanistic psychologist, more closely associated with humanism, which itself is kind of closely associated with positive psychology. So he had influence on both fields, but I did not introduce Maslow to this lecture. He comes up in a later lecture. Money and happiness. Right, we talked about that. All right, what about children and happiness? People usually believe parenthood is central to a meaningful, fulfilling life. Research supports this, but qualifies this. And I have updated my slides because last year I quoted poor research that said that parenthood was not related to happiness. It's true that research did find that, but that's the problem with relying on research. It depends which research and how much research you rely on. And I didn't rely on adequate research last year, so I concluded last year on the same slide that having children was not related to happiness, whereas now I'm telling you guys that parenthood is related to happiness because I've looked at more research, summaries of research, and that's what they find, or this is what they can explain how. So I'll cover the slide and then we can see how that relates to past research. So research supports but qualifies this. Globally, this is a quote from, okay, so this research is nearly 10 years old. 2 sources, both from 2011. Here's a quote from each of those. Globally, happiness decreases with the number of children. This association, however, is strongly modified. The association between happiness and fertility evolves from negative to neutral to positive above age 40. So people generally have children in their 20s and 30s, and they're not yet feeling they're not yet benefiting from a happier, more meaningful, more fulfilling life until those children seem to grow up, or I don't know, somehow it seems that the association between happiness and child rearing, which is called fertility in this case, but it all means the same thing. It means child rearing. Evolves from negative to neutral to positive as people age from 20s, 30s, 40s into their 50s, 60s, 70s. So as people pass their midway point in life, or more than the midway point of their life, they become the association between those who have had children and happiness is positive. Those who have not had children miss out on that opportunity for meaning and the happiness that they derive from that, from having a family, apparently. So analyses by welfare regimes show that the negative fertility happiness association of younger adults is weaker in countries with higher public support for families, and the positive association over the age of 40 is strongest in countries where old age support depends mostly on the family. This gives us a clue why those over the age of 40 are happier. It's because partly because they are feeling safer and more secure because they have children that presumably will take care of them when they're no longer able to care for themselves. All right, so that explains the over 40. And from the younger than 40, they are happier when they have more social support or public support. And they're less happy when they have less public support, presumably because of their financial difficulties in raising a child, because as expensive as it is to live on your own, it's even harder to live when you have to support someone else or multiple others, especially with education and clothing and etc. Overall, these results suggest that children are a long-term investment in well-being. I like that statement very much. That's a nice summary statement, and that's exactly what it is. It's a summary statement at the end of an abstract for this research article. And that's because just like with investments, where you invest your money, you don't see any return on investment right away. You have to wait a while until you can see that return on investment. So that's the same how it is with children. You don't see happiness when you have children right away. You see greater happiness build over decades. And that's a generalization from this research. Generalization from a generalization of research. Meta studies. Another quote, being simultaneously in a partnership and having children clearly results in higher happiness. Conversely, having children while being single corresponds to a more disadvantaged situation, especially for fathers. So we can see how the happiness correlation with having children is very tricky and complex and difficult because it depends on these other factors. It depends on being married, because if you have children outside of marriage, then you're not happier. So if we combine the research from married people and not married people and you average them, then it would look like there's no benefit or no greater happiness in having children. So we have to really pull apart these variables so that we can see where is the source of happiness and unhappiness coming from. Is it directly from the children themselves, or is it from the hardship, the financial hardships, from the, yeah, it seems like it is. And the support for taking care of a child, because taking care of a child is not all about money. It's also about adequate skill, expertise, know-how, social support, just help from another partner who's also able to provide attention and support and well-being for the child. These things matter. Stability, life stability, predictability, greater control. Okay, let's take a break. So it's 2:03, come back at 2:13. Hello, welcome back. I'll get started again. I wanted to add a further point on a previous slide. This one. I put a little asterisk next to predicted right here, and I wanted to clarify that term. Predicted means correlated with, often in psychological research. That is to say, it's not predicting the future, it's predicting or accounting for a variable. That's all. When a variable is entered into a correlation or regression analysis, it is called a predictor, and its correlation is called predicting, even though it's not predicting the future, but rather predicting outcome data already collected. Get used to translating predicted to mean correlated with, because these terms are often used synonymously, even though in their original definition they're not the same, but they're used similarly or confusingly, synonymously in scientific research. It is confusing, so you should be ready and willing to clarify, do you mean correlated with? And sometimes the answer is yes, it means correlated with, and other times it means legitimately predicted, as in predicting a yet unmeasured attribute that has yet to manifest and will manifest in the future. So sometimes it means one thing and sometimes another. The problem arises because of the statistics lingo, because a predictor is simply a variable that accounts for the variance in another variable, even when causality is completely undetermined. So predicting doesn't quite mean predicting in a time sense. It's more like accounting for variance or explaining variance, or even just simply correlating with a variable. Okay, education, employment, and happiness. Happy people, compared to those who are less happy, are more likely to graduate from college. Yay! So good for you. You're in college, you're headed in the right direction there. Secure, meaningful, and engaging jobs. So meaningful and engaging jobs does correlate with happiness. And succeed in those jobs. Education shows a weak positive correlation with happiness. So Now you're getting additional education beyond high school. So you're continuing to push one variable, and hopefully that corresponds with an increase in that other variable, happiness. Intelligence shows an even weaker relation. So intelligence and happiness are barely related, slightly related, but education and happiness are more strongly correlated. It's not always the case that intelligent people seek more education. There is a correlation, but it's not a very perfect one, not a very strong one, but it is there. Next variable, religiosity and happiness. Going back a step. I said intelligence and education are not necessarily correlated. However, there is a causal correlation between education and intelligence, because the more education a person gets, the higher their IQ rises. And that doesn't seem to be a filter effect. It seems to be causally related. It seems that education can actually teach people how to be smarter. So there is a possible causal model and explanation for the relationship between intelligence and education, besides the one that smarter people are generally more attracted to learning, I think. I'm not certain about that, but I think that's the case. Okay, next, religiosity.
I have a
Yeah.
question before
Yeah.
we move on. You know that old saying that ignorance is bliss? Does that still is there any like backing with that little statement?
That's a great question.
Since you said like intelligence was not correlated with happiness, but education is, right?
Right. Uh-huh. For that saying, it is true in some situations and it is false in some situations. So it's this kind of thing that people say it because they can identify when it's true, but they fail to realize that it's often false. It's often false that ignorance is bliss. Sometimes ignorance is misery and precludes you from achieving bliss.
Mm.
So it's
So
not
it's like,
always, but it's sometimes.
yeah, okay, I understand.
Yeah, great question. Religiosity and happiness. Nations and states with more difficult living conditions, such as those that experience widespread hunger and lower life expectancy, tend to be more highly religious than societies with more favorable living conditions. Among those who live in nations with difficult living conditions, so the nations that are more religious, religiosity is associated with greater well-being. However, in nations with more favorable living conditions, religiosity is unrelated to well-being, such that religious and non-religious people report similar levels of well-being. So it seems like the religious commitment is helpful to happiness as long as um, being well-to-do or living in a well-to-do country has not yet functioned to compensate or replace the happiness derived from religion. I don't really know how to explain it. I'm just kind of venturing a guess. But yeah, I don't know what to make of that entirely. I wish that that were not the case. I wish that it were the case that religiosity were associated with happiness, regardless of what country you live in. But this is, I'm going on the data here. The data suggests that religiosity is, I'm trying to explain it. I think that in more well-to-do countries, people have found alternative avenues to happiness. So that's my own personal opinion. I think that it can be explained in terms of avenues. So in the well-to-do countries, they may achieve happiness through other means than religion, whereas in those countries without the adequate wealth to achieve happiness through basic needs, they may achieve happiness through entirely different means that are not related to wealth, religiosity, or commitment to one's beliefs, religious, spiritual beliefs. That's my own gut. Well, that's my own rational attempt to explain the data here, and my own hope, because I think that religion really does provide access to deep levels of happiness that may not be pursued as much in countries where people are really well to do. I don't know. I'm really speculating and generalizing, which maybe I shouldn't do because I don't have data to back that up. All right, so going on. Culture and happiness. To the extent that people possess characteristics that are valued within their culture, they tend to be happier. So self-esteem is related to happiness, life satisfaction, but not as much in collectivist cultures, only in individualist cultures. So if we go to a very collectivist culture, we find that self-esteem and happiness are not related. Why? Well, it seems that this characteristic only explains happiness within its cultural context. So self-esteem functions to access happiness when there is an assumption of what, like buying into the beliefs that underlie that culture, such as we are individuals, ultimately we are individuals, or ultimately we are a collective. Another example is that extroverted people tend to be happier in extroverted cultures. Before I came to across this statement and this research, I didn't know that there was such a thing as extroverted cultures, but it seems that you can classify cultures and countries and peoples just about any way that you want to. So if people are more extroverted in Italy than they are in Nicaragua, then you can say that that's an extroverted culture. And the extroverted people, and then we can find this association. In the extroverted culture, extroversion is associated with happiness, but not in the introverted cultures. So that's interesting. it shows again that these cultural factors, which we take as assumptions for how to live and how to think and how to view life, affect how much our personal traits make us happy, or how happy we can be with our personal traits. Interesting, I think, because culture seems to be the great qualifier to these traits that we associate with happiness. So maybe there is no universal trait association to happiness. Maybe it's always qualified by the culture. I don't know that. I'm just speculating. So there's a question for happiness researchers, maybe for you if you want to study happiness in the future. Next slide, age and beauty and happiness. You might assume that youthfulness and beauty correspond to happiness, but research shows the opposite. People tend to get happier as they age. So there goes your beauty and your beautiful skin and youthfulness. As you get more and more wrinkles, you also get happier on average. Although one's perceived level of attractiveness predicts happiness. So the more you think that you're beautiful, the happier you are on average. But that thinking you're beautiful and your actual beauty is not correlated perfectly. And it turns out that the actual physical attractiveness is only weakly correlated with happiness. More strongly correlated is your perceived level of your own happiness. So I think this shows the divide between actual beauty and perceived beauty, which is rather typical that there's a difference between those two. That's typical of an individualist culture, in my opinion, in my understanding, because individualist cultures focus on self-esteem and promoting self-esteem by any means possible, even when it means departing from the truth. So because self-esteem is promoted above truth value, we get people who look in the mirror and perceive themselves through the lens of their own self-esteem, inflated self-esteem oftentimes in individualist cultures. I'm speaking off the cuff here. I'm not speaking based on research. I'm just speaking in generality from my sense or sentiment, my abstraction of understanding these things. So individualist cultures promote this division between fact and fiction, the fiction that feeds into the self-esteem. So then when people look in the mirrors, they see their inflated sense of beauty rather than their actual beauty. And then they are happy based on their self-esteem, their self-perceived attractiveness, rather than their, how peers see them. And I think that that's relevant to Thailand and relevant to many countries in the world because of, again, I'm speaking off the cuff here, but this is how I see it. I see focus on individualism and the promotion of the individual as a growing trend in Thailand that has been growing over the past many decades. You could call it westernization, or you could call it globalization, or you could call it Western influence. I don't know what. But it's also, we might start calling it the influence of it's like the influence of individual values, which is a cultural trait which seems to be a trend, if I can call it that, that may be waxing now and will maybe wane someday in the future, but waxing now meaning it's becoming more popular now. All right, I'm speaking off the cuff based on my own opinion. That's how I see it. That's how I see the world. Okay, going on. Any thoughts? Would anyone else like to add to this little discussion monologue? Okay. All right, so that was all of those associations with happiness. We've got age and beauty, culture, religion, education, employment, children, money, relationships. So a lot of things that relate to happiness. Now we change gear a little bit. Emotion adaptation. Something similar to sensory adaptation. If you're looking at the picture, I pulled this off the internet. This is called the hedonic treadmill. I noticed that phrase, hedonic treadmill, when I was reading an article and looked it up online and grabbed a little diagram. Here's this dude in a treadmill, and he is dreaming about his world and making his world bigger, or growing or something. How to make a bigger mark in the world. He's this treadmill shows adapting, seeing, wanting, buying, achieving happiness, adapting to that level of happiness that came from purchasing. So once you have happiness from possessing a purchase, then you quickly adapt to that happiness level. But then once you adapt, then you look for more happiness and you see things and you want to consume. And so you want and you buy, and that leads to happiness that's short term, and so on and so, and it's the treadmill, hedonic treadmill. Similar to sensory adaptation in response to life events. This can happen in the positive and in the negative. When an event promotes an intense emotional experience, whether positive or negative, positive like marriage proposal, birth of a child, acceptance into law school, or negative things like widowhood, divorce, layoff from work. At first, we experience the emotional impact at full intensity, and then over time, we adjust to the new emotional norm, and we revert to our baseline level of happiness with that new condition. So at first, we lose our job and we feel depressed, but then after a few weeks or months, we, even without finding another job, we've already rebounded from that depression back to our normal state. And we might not be able to justify it, We might say, you know, why am I happy now? I shouldn't be happier. I still don't have a job. But we rebound to that baseline level of happiness through all kinds of we can justify it psychologically, rationally, or maybe biologically. But regardless of the explanation, it's just something that seems to happen. Over time, we adjust to the new emotional norm and we revert to our baseline happiness. Dramatic life events have much less long-lasting impact on happiness than we might expect. Any comments? Happiness interventions. I read this study by Seligman, 2005. He found he compared 5 interventions that were designed to increase people's happiness in the present, and he wanted to see how long would that happiness last into the future. So he compared 5 of them and a baseline 6 control condition, and he found that of those 5 interventions, only 2 of them had those 2 of them lasted only 1 week, and yet the measured increase in happiness continued for as long as 6 months. However, that was partly dependent upon people continuing to perform the activities that created that happiness in the first place. So let me explain. One of the interventions was writing down for 1 week 3 good things that happened every day and explain their causes. So if you do this for 7 days in a row, write down 3 things that you're happy about from that day and what caused those things to happen or what caused you to be happy about them. Try to explain that happiness. Do that every day for 7 days. You might increase your happiness a month later, even as long as 6 months later. Who knows how long it lasts? Maybe even a year. I don't know. I've never tried this, but I don't know why not, because I want to be happy. So maybe I should try that. Number 2, identifying 5 personal strengths. Subjects were told to look up their personal strengths at this website and then use the top strength in a new way each day for 7 days. And then that intervention also produced happiness, not just during the 7 days, but 1 month later, 3 months later, 6 months later. So really long lasting manipulations or interventions, they're called interventions. Again, this is so long lasting and powerful. I'm not sure why I haven't done it myself. We all want to be happier. So reading about this research, why not apply it to ourselves? I don't know why not. So maybe we should. Another intervention was actually the most powerful intervention of all, but its effect was not observed 6 months later. It was observed 1 month later. And that's extremely interesting and important and powerful, because doing something and then still being happy about it 1 month later is quite significant and impressive and important. It's quite a significant, large effect in the psychological literature to see any effect lasting a month, let alone 6 months. So in this third intervention, It's write and deliver a letter to someone who you have not properly thanked in your life. I can think of one right offhand. I can think of my advisor in graduate school. I have not properly thanked her. I should write a letter to her and send it, because that is likely to boost my happiness, not only that day, but over the coming days and weeks. That's like, that's potential happiness that I could add on to my life. I haven't done it yet personally. I haven't done this yet. And yet it's just there waiting for me to grab hold of that extra happiness and add it on to my life. So it's quite low-hanging fruit. Low-hanging fruit means easy to achieve reward. The reward is right there, and it's easy to get it. So I'm going to make a note to myself to do that, because why not? We all want to be happier, and happiness does lead to greater success, because that's a double direction, bi-directional relationship. So this is a very sensible application. Maybe we should all, consider it. Think about whether you might want to apply these interventions to yourself in your own life. It's not that hard to do. The instructions are basically right on this slide. They're not very complicated instructions. Yeah. But feel free to look up that article. The source is at the end of the lecture. And then you can see the explanation or the descriptions of these interventions in more precision. But basically, that's it on this slide. It's pretty simple. And there were 2 other interventions that were not better than baseline. So those were not discussed further. Positive psychology and research. So positive psychology, which has been an area or field of psychology, a growing field lately, I think it's growing quite effectively. When the APA announced not APA, when one university announced positive psychology as the very first university to open up this field for graduate studies, 200 people applied within 1 month. So I think that says a lot about I think the field and the description of positive psychology by itself already says that people are interested and they're going to go for it, because people want happiness. And it's become a very fruitful area of research, as I'm going to illustrate with the next few slides. Positive psychology research. Some of the topics studied by positive psychologists include altruism and empathy. Sorry, before I forget, when I was talking about the first university to open up positive psychology as a field of study, graduate level, that was in 2005, and now it's 2020. So 15 years have gone by, and I think the field of psychology has grown a lot since then. I believe that there are many universities that offer a field of focus on positive psychology. I'm not sure about many, but at least 2 and probably more than 5. I don't know. I haven't really looked at that. But I've heard of it. I've heard of this field of study in graduate school called positive psychology. And I've heard of courses in undergraduate study called positive psychology, so it's a growing thing. Okay, text on the slide says some of the topics studied by positive psychologists include altruism, empathy, creativity, forgiveness, compassion, the importance of positive emotions, enhancement of immune system functioning, savoring the fleeting moments of life, and strengthening virtues. You know what's interesting about all of this list of topics is that they are distinct to positive psychology. You know, these things have existed for forever, and yet psychology has never focused on them. Why? Why not? These things are really, truly important to life. Compassion, forgiveness, creativity. Why have these things not been studied in greater detail by psychologists? That's the problem.
Maybe it's because of both like negative bias, where we're more inclined to focus on negative things and remember negative things, and psychology has always been connected with um, well, mental diseases and trying to help people with it. And in that case, we've sort of forgot that we're we're just trying to quote unquote cure rather than improve, because it's like
Exactly. Exactly. For some unfortunate reason, psychology has has aligned itself with psychopathology. Psychology, psychopathology. They're different, but and yet they seem almost like they're like two, lined up, as if the field exists for the study of sickness. But why do we ever assume that? I don't know. It's this weird association that accidentally formed, and because of it, positive things have been neglected, positive aspects of life. And that unfortunate neglect is now being addressed by positive psychology, I would say. Or another way to say it is that positive psychology gives us permission to care about the positive things about people and not just the negative things about people. Recent efforts are gradually extending toward peace and well-being at global community level. Good. World peace. Wonderful. You know, this is something that that humans have always dreamed of, and now psychology is taking a stab at it, so to speak, saying, hey, we study this stuff. Why don't we try our hand at world peace now? Why not? And I think that's wonderful. This is really positive, wonderful, great. It makes me proud to be a psychologist if we can think and see that our field is gradually extending toward peace and well-being at the community level. In a war-torn world in which conflict, hatred, and distrust are common, such a positive peace psychology could be valuable for understanding how to overcome oppression and work toward global peace, world peace. That only comes at a rather high and uh, and global sense of interest and concern and awareness. So not every researcher is going to be interested in solving or addressing global problems, but if we if we encourage this focus on positive life, I mean, now that we've opened psychology up to looking at how to grow and improve and enjoy more happiness, and kind of like, I don't know if you've heard of life hack. Life hack means secret of life. And if psychologists can start and continue to focus at learning and looking at finding the secret to happiness and the secrets to life lived successfully and well, satisfyingly, it paints a positive picture of tomorrow, the future, not just of the world, but psychology and the world, and psychology's role to play in our future. So very positive stuff for positive psychology. Next slide. I have something to read here. Well, I'll read the slide first. Research on kindness, forgiveness, compassion, and mindfulness has examined a range of ideas of a kindness curriculum in schools. That's an interesting idea. The neural correlates of pro-social behavior, psychological effects of Tai Chi training, digital games to foster pro-social behavior in children. Ooh, I think that's a good one. And the effectiveness of yoga and breathing exercises in reducing symptoms of PTSD. That's not to mention meditation to improve depression and anxiety and stuff. And now I was going to read these research areas on kindness, forgiveness, compassion, and mindfulness are being explored by Dr. Davidson, who is a lab director and directs studies on these topics. Topics such as Tai Chi training, digital games, etc. And he took as his further inspiration a challenge by His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama to apply the rigors of science to the study of positive qualities of mind. In other words, the Dalai Lama also encouraged this psychologist, Dr. Davidson, to pursue positive psychology research. The Center for Investigating Healthy Minds is what he called his center, continues to develop or conduct scientific research to develop mental health training approaches to help people live happier, healthier lives. Why not? Why shouldn't we all be involved in pursuing happier, healthier lives, whether it's through research or through applying the results of that research to our own lives, or pursuing our happiness in whatever ways we best understand and know and can access. Continuing to talk about positive psychology research, qualities that promote psychological well-being, for example, having meaning and purpose in life and a sense of autonomy, positive emotions, and satisfaction with life, are linked to favorable health outcomes, especially cardiovascular risks, health, largely due to improved health behaviors such as improved diet, physical activity, and sleep quality. So those are mediators, which means that greater happiness leads to healthier behaviors, which leads to greater health. Optimism, which is looking on the bright side, and it's one of the 5 stances that I mentioned in my first lecture. The 5 stances on happiness and success and well-being. To expect good things will happen, to view life stressors and difficulties as temporary setbacks and external to oneself, is also a significant predictor of positive health outcomes. Much research links optimism to longevity and healthier behaviors, fewer post-surgical complications, better immune functioning among men with prostate cancer, for example, and better treatment adherence. So better sticking with taking medication and engaging in doctor prescribed behaviors such as exercise and more sleep and stuff. So better treatment adherence. Optimistic people report fewer physical symptoms, less pain, better physical functioning, and less likely to be rehospitalized following heart surgery. All of these things are coming from optimism. And optimism is a mindset that goes hand in hand with happiness, because the optimistic person thinks happier thoughts, which lead into this vicious upward positive spiral where positive thoughts lead to happiness. So optimism, positive thoughts, happiness, they all go in the same general framework or model. Another slide on research. Positive affect, which means positive emotion. Affect means emotion. From pleasurable engagement with the environment, for example, happiness, joy, enthusiasm, alertness, and excitement. So when you get those emotions from engaging with your environment, when you engage and you feel happier, joyful, enthusiastic, alert, and excited, these can be brief or long-lasting or trait-like, meaning that you can feel alertness, not just when you're engaging in something, but alertness in general, or excitement when you're engaging in something, or excitement in general. So both of these things, both like it can be a state or a trait. It can be brief or it can be long lasting. These positive affects, independent of age and gender and income, these positive affects are associated with greater social connectedness, greater emotional and practical support, and greater adaptive coping efforts, lower depression, greater longevity, and more favorable physiological functioning. So this all comes from positive psychology research. As you can see from this list of findings from positive psychology research, it's very positive that we are learning these things and that we know these things now. So the next step after knowing them is applying them. I should be talking to myself, because these cutting edge findings do us little good if we don't put them to use. So if we know that positive affect leads to all these positive things, and the optimism leads to all these positive things, and that happiness and well-being So we should try to, if you want happiness, then it makes sense that you would try to achieve through all of these research supported findings. All right, last topic is the topic of flow. But I have been talking a while, so let me give you a break. So let's come back to class at 4:02. 10-minute break. All right, welcome back from the break. I'll get started now. By the way, I have added this slide and uploaded to Blackboard, so you have now a slide that lists the 24 traits by their happiness factor. So I think that was a nice request. I'm glad I received it because I think these traits are something good for you to look at as well. They're all related to happiness. And these relations between these traits and happiness is not culture dependent. These things, for the most part, go beyond any particular culture. They are universal, related to happiness. Okay, flow. Flow was a word coined by Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. Important in fostering a deep sense of well-being is the ability to derive flow and pleasurable experience from the things that we do in life. Flow occurs when people are so engaged toward a goal and so engrossed in the activity to the point where they feel they lose themselves in the activity and the process becomes its own reward. The joy is in the pursuit more than in the realization. So it's not what you produce, but the very act of producing it is fun. We could say that's probably true for artists and musicians, etc. People effortlessly maintain their concentration and focus, and they feel as though they have complete control of their actions, and time seems to pass more slowly than usual. And it typically occurs when people are engaged in challenging activities that require skills and knowledge that they know that they possess. So again, I was mentioning on one of the very first slides of lecture that engagement is key to the to the engaged life. And then I mentioned flow on that slide, and here it is again. Flow is engagement in an activity that is challenging, requires skill and knowledge that you know you possess. So same thing I was saying before. For example, people would more likely report flow experience in relation to their work or their hobbies because those are things that they have know-how or experience, knowledge and skills, and they know that they possess them. It is usually related to creative endeavors and leisure activities, but can even be experienced by workers who like their jobs or students who like learning, for example. So it can be experienced by anyone as long as they like what they're doing, basically. Flow. Another slide or two slides on flow. Flow, oh wait, maybe I condensed it to one. The word flow came from respondents in Mihai Csikszentmihalyi's research. He's the one who coined the term, and he coined it from listening to his respondents spontaneously use the term when they were asked to describe how it felt when what they were doing was going well. So when you're playing a piano piece and you're playing it very well, or when you are typing on the computer and you're typing very quickly and efficiently and not making any mistakes, you might enter a state where everything just seems to flow naturally without struggle and without difficulty. I can't say without effort, because engagement is effort. So you're always engaged in your flow activity.
Is the flow related to like that when people say they're in the zone, is that basically the flow that you're mentioning? Like when like a
Yeah.
football player is playing like exceptionally well, like super focused.
Yes. I would say that is absolutely right. Being in the zone is being in flow. Thank you. I never connected those two before. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. When asked the question, do you ever get involved in something so deeply that nothing else seems to matter and you lose track of time? About 20% of Americans and Europeans reported having these flow-like experiences regularly. How do you get that engaged? Okay, so going back to the 20%. So that's not a lot of people. Only 1 in 5 seems to experience this thing called flow. But that's unusual because everyone should experience flow at least some of the time in their life. But maybe it's just the way that the question was phrased, and it's getting only the most clear and certain cases of flow experience. Anyway, how to get that engaged? In other words, how to get into flow? All right, have a clear goal, select it yourself, get immediate feedback on goal progress, and have autonomy and high degree of control. When you have all of these ingredients together, I would add also enjoy the activity. You have to naturally enjoy the activity too, I think. I mean, there has to be something about it that's inherently enjoyable, right? Maybe not. Maybe it's just the feeling of being successful about it. I'm not sure. Any thoughts or comments? I thought of something else to add. I was like listening to a book or a podcast, I don't remember. And I was hearing about doctors when they have their scalpel in hand and a surgeon is making cuts on a patient. They have to be so focused on their activity that they forget the sensations in the rest of their body. They have to kind of block out from their attention everything else in their life so that all their attention is focused not even on their hand, but on the tip of the knife, the scalpel. So all their attention is on that scalpel tip. That level of engagement, that absorption into their craft, sounds to me like they would be in a flow moment. The surgeon would be in flow or in the zone, and not because they want to, but because they have to. And I have heard surgeons report that when they are in the zone, they do enjoy it. They experience joy, because that's what they're good at, and that's what they're getting paid to do, and that's how they're contributing value to their community. Obviously, they have just looking at this slide, these 4 sub bullets, they have a clear goal. They selected it themselves, the surgeon I'm talking about. They get immediate feedback on goal progress. They have autonomy and a high degree of control. So they have all the ingredients right there for entering into a flow experience. And I think that surgeons do report either a high degree of stress or a high degree of flow. I think the really good surgeon, really good ones, aren't stressed about what they're doing. They're in flow, I think. And it helps to really be in flow or engaged in your activity strongly if you're going to get exceptionally skilled at it. So we should find that people who are exceptional at their trade are more familiar with flow. I don't know if there's research on that or not. Probably. I don't know it. All right. That's the end of the lecture. Here's a conclusion slide. A new orientation in psychology has opened up, positive psychology, which emphasizes what can go right and how. This gives positive psychology a huge and uncharted terrain that people naturally care about. As humans seek better control of themselves and their environment, this area of psychology looks at how we can become better and better rather than how to avoid getting worse and worse. This difference in orientation in the positive direction offers a new source of driving power to the field. Positive psychology, by orienting people toward their positives and their strengths, may usher a new form of psychology into pop culture even more effectively than its pathologizing sibling psychologies. Or world culture, I could have said. All right, so that concludes lecture. References, podcast assignment. You're assigned to listen to The Healing Potential of Non-Ordinary States of Mind by Stanislav Grof. It's a YouTube video. And here is your lab assignment. You have 2 assignments. First one, in groups, discuss the podcast BS Jobs. That's supposed to relate to this lecture a little. Submit answers to these questions. There are 5 questions. You can number them 1 through 5 or A through E. If you could, please copy the question before your answer so I can be reminded of it when I'm reading your answers or when my teaching assistant reads your answers so that we know that your answers actually make sense. But here are the questions. About what percentage of people feel they're in pointless jobs? Why are people secretive about how little they do in their jobs? Is it okay that another owns your time? Why or why not? What is duct taping job? A duct taping job, in case you forgot, is one of those jobs. Well, I'll let you discuss it. You probably have some notes or can remember the podcast. What's wrong with having a boring, pointless job? All right, so discuss those and then come back to, oh wait, no, you don't have to come back to class because the second activity is conducted individually. You're gonna click on, go to Blackboard, click on 11 Labs, 17 Compliments. I haven't made it visible yet. I'll make that visible right now. Open the PDF, complete the steps in pairs or in larger groups. Oh, so this is a pair work activity. I remember now. And then submit your answers individually. Because on the PDF, there's an item number 6 that asks you to write down some things and submit them in Blackboard. So you're going to have an individual submission as part of your lab assignment. So number 1 is assigned in groups and completed in groups and submitted in groups. Number 2 is submitted individually, but you can work in groups to do it. So I will assign you to groups of 6 at first. And then at the end of 20 minutes, I will call you back to the classroom and reassign you to pairs so that you can conduct the second part in pairs.
For the first part, can we group up with, if we're like we have like a group, can we group up because we have exactly 6?
Definitely.
Okay.
Okay. So I'm gonna declare 20 minutes as adequate time for completing step number 1, lab assignment number 1. And then I'll ask you one person from each group to submit your answers on Blackboard with all your names on it. And then after 20 minutes, come back to the classroom to be reassigned. Or if you're working in face-to-face groups, I just want you to pair up for the second activity. So you
Okay.
don't have to come back to the classroom, just pair up to complete the second one.
Okay,
But if-
so we can just leave after it's done, right?
Yeah, if you're meeting in person, then you can leave after this. If you're meeting on Zoom, then come back in 20 minutes. I'll call you back in 20 minutes. All right, so that's it. If you're meeting in person, please feel free, please leave the classroom now. And thanks for coming. Bye. And for those of you who are meeting in groups on Zoom, stick around. And I see a note from one student asking, is 7 people okay? Yes, that's okay. Yes. And fewer than 6 is okay as well. All right, so now I'll try to group you. Since there are 16 people, I will group you in groups of 5. All right, so I'll call you back in 20 minutes. Try to complete this first step in 20 minutes. See you soon.